I do want to take a moment now to recognize this year's Leadership Circle directors, and they so generously give their time and talent to the group, and we are deeply grateful for everything that they do to make the Leadership Circle a success. So please hold your applause until the end. So Clarissa and Brian Robinson, co-chairs. Where's Clarissa? Oh, hi, Clarissa. I didn't see you walk in. Let's see, Charlie Morrow and Jerry Schwalbach are the co-chairs, and I understand they're not here with us today, but I believe they might be watching on the stream. Julian Taylor Burke, Carol, and Dr. Charles P. Dries Jr., and Carol's right here in the front. Let's see, Gail and Ed Ober, and Dee Dee and Ken Vecchione, and I see Dee Dee right over there. And we would also like to introduce and welcome some new directors to the group, Brittany and Matthew Messmer, Corrine and Daryl Berger, and Paula and Bill Witcherman. So a big round of applause for all of you helping to make this all possible. And now it is my pleasure to introduce David Higginson. He not only is the Executive Vice President, Chief Innovation Officer at Phoenix Children's. I love that title. That's a super cool title. He's also a longstanding Leadership Circle member. As part of the hospital's leadership team, David plays an integral role in the selection of the final proposals that are presented to you each year. David, take it away.
Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here today, and thank you all so much for your work, especially Kerry and the directors. We really couldn't do it without all the effort you put in, and I know next year's directors are all busy working. I've been working with them on some incredible opportunities we have for next year, so this program just keeps going on and getting better, and every year this room's always full. And now we have a lot of people online as well. So one of the great things about COVID has been we've been able to include so many more people and bring people online. So we've got a huge number of people online, including our CEO, Bob Meyer, who couldn't be in person today, but he is listening online. Bob often says this is his favorite event of the year from the foundation. It's fascinating. We never get to see this before, people coming up and presenting to you, and you get the power to choose about which innovations we move forward at the hospital. It's such an interesting event. A little bit about the program, in case you don't know. It's been around since 2004. We've had 75 grants be funded, 75 different initiatives be funding, and $5.5 million of donated funds go to move those things forward. Those things aren't just awarded and then nothing else happens. Real innovation happens at the hospital because of these grants. I've been awarded one myself, which of course I think was great, but we also had some other ones. Just this year, a program called Watcher, that some of you may remember, that alerted all our nurses and doctors about kids that were rapidly getting more sick and that might have a coding event. That has saved lives. I promise you, that has saved lives, and that's the work that you did. And so I couldn't be more thankful for the effort and time you put into this, especially as members. It's really important for us to be keeping engaged. The other thing people I really want to recognize today is our presenters. You're going to hear from them in a minute. This is not their day job, okay? I can remember doing this and get up in front of you. I was very, very nervous. This is not what we normally do, but they've put a lot of effort in to try to take their complex medical ideas and innovations and present them to you in a way that's meaningful and hopefully will resonate. So I've sat in that seat over there. I'm sure they're a little nervous waiting to get started here. The first one's always the best because you get it over first. But they've got some great presentations, and we've worked really, really hard to give you hopefully something that's of interest. So thanks again, guys. We really appreciate all the work they do at the hospital every single day as doctors and researchers, but also doing this experience. So one more round of applause for them. And just one thing I would tell you is the hospital has really grown in the last 15 to 20 years, probably more than we could ever think. I heard 10% every year it's grown, which is incredible. Through your support, the community support, we've grown the hospital. We're adding more buildings. We're adding more doctors, nearly 600 doctors at the hospital now. But there's a point at which that doesn't work anymore. We can't add enough buildings. We can't get enough doctors for the problems. We have to innovate. If we don't find new ways to treat patients, we won't be able to keep up and we won't be able to cure cancer and all those things we want to do. So this really represents a core part of moving the hospital forward, not just today, but really in the 10 to 20 years in the future. So your support is really building us a pathway to the future, and so thank you so much for all your help. Thank you.
I used to pretend that I needed glasses on the news, and now I really do need glasses. So I'm just going to go ahead and go for it today because I don't want to mess up any of your games. David, thank you so much, and we are all eager to hear from our presenters. So today you will hear from 6 finalists. They will be making the case for their projects, which totaled nearly $500,000 in funding requests. Each finalist will have 7 minutes to present, and at the end of each presentation, there will be a 2-minute, is it 2 or 3? Rhonda, 3. Okay, a 3-minute Q&A, and we keep it very strict. We run this by the rules, so please feel free to jot down your questions during all of the presentations. And after the presentations are complete, it will be time to cast your vote for the proposals that you feel will have the most impact on Phoenix children's patients and, in fact, on children everywhere. At that time, we will ask you to rank the proposals 1 through 6, with 1 being your first choice and 6 being your last. And we do know that each one, of course, is a worthy contender, but we have to make some of these hard choices here today. If you are here in person, please cast your vote using the ballot in your program. You can write your rankings on the ballot, or you can scan the QR code in the ballot with your smartphone to vote online. If you're watching on the live stream, you can use the link that you received by email to vote online. And now let's meet our first presenter, Dr. Teresa Currier-Thomas of Barrow Neurological Institute at Phoenix Children's, and her project is called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, Equipment and Supplies to Evaluate How Sex Hormones Influence Brain Function. Doctor?
It's so good to see all of your faces. All right, let's get started. So I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky, and we lived in a tiny town with 1 red light and a couple of stop signs. And one morning when I was 12 years old, I woke up with abdominal pain that was so bad I couldn't stand up straight. And that's me. So I can recall actually crying from the pain, which is something I don't normally do. And my dad took me to the town's only physician, who did a physical exam, and the doctor said that I was getting ready to become a woman and start my period, and that I would be just fine. So it took over a month for me to recover, and I had sores on my knees because it hurt less to crawl than it did walk. No one thought to question the doctor because I was around the right age to start my period, yet I didn't start my period for another year. And when I finally did get my period, I never had cramps that left me unable to walk. So flash forward 20 years, and I'm married, and I'm having trouble staying pregnant. During a laparoscopic exam, the surgeon said that my abdomen was full of scar tissue and adhesions. And he said that it looked like, he asked me if I'd had any major abdominal infections like appendicitis. And I automatically flashed back to this painful childhood experience. So the reason I tell you this story today is because my infertility could have been caused from a doctor who couldn't differentiate between menstrual cramps and abdominal infection. And it's one of many, many examples of how girls and women are often misdiagnosed or not treated appropriately because of the lack of understanding of the physiological differences between sexes, and that these misdiagnoses, they can have lifelong consequences. So with that, I'm really excited to present to you and ask you for your help today with equipment, supplies, and short-term technical support to bolster my research for my next $1 million grant application on how sex impacts brain function before and after traumatic brain injury. Now, we often joke that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. And all of us know that females have 2 X chromosomes and males have an XY. And it makes sense that these X and Y chromosomes, they fundamentally guide different genetic and physiological processes throughout our body. And so while this is known, most preclinical research is done on male animals. And so most clinical data that do run clinical trials don't have enough participants to evaluate sex differences. So, it's me being right-handed. So this is a chart. It's a summary of the top 4-cited medical journals, the most reputable ones. And what it's doing is it's highlighting the sex of the animals used for preclinical research. And so if you look up, you can see the green, and I've highlighted in yellow a couple of neuroscience, pharmacology, physiology. So if you look at the green areas, it's 20% or less include both males and females for comparison. This means that 80% of our preclinical studies for medication or drug safety and efficacy are done on only male animals. This highlights a more important question. Can the drugs we take work differently between our boys and girls? Shockingly, we are finding that the answer is yes. But for most drugs, we simply don't know. And so what does that mean for healthcare and women? Well, it means that our medical treatments are optimized for men and boys, and without consideration for the physiological or hormonal difference of girls and women, who are actually the highest users of the healthcare system. And so it is the most likely explanation as to why girls and women report a greater number and a more severe side effects, ineffectiveness of treatments, and in some cases, life-threatening drug interactions. So for those of you who have been part of Leadership Circle for some time, you will have heard me talk about my mom's journey with traumatic brain injury and how traumatic brain injury caused severe depression, anxiety, and memory deficits. Now, at the time, which is back in the 70s, no one knew that traumatic brain injury could have chronic and debilitating symptoms, and no one understood how these can impact a family dynamic. And so this understanding of how TBI causes these symptoms has become my life work. So over the past years, numerous clinical reports have started to indicate that girls and women experience longer and more severe symptoms after concussion. And this indicates that there may be an important role for sex or sex hormones in the recovery after concussion. Now, of course, these reports deeply resonate with me for my mom, and because less than 5% of traumatic brain injury research includes females. So we started to add females to our preclinical research. And our initial findings have been really exciting. First, we found that glutamate, which is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system, communicates differently between males and females. And this is important because many drugs we take modulate communication either directly or indirectly, where the sex differences could explain why girls and women are more sensitive and have more side effects. We've also recently published multiple sex-specific interactions after traumatic brain injury that indicate the need to treat males and females, girls and boys, as their own independent group and not lump them all into one. So these measurements can only be made with very unique equipment, and this equipment is in my lab because of you, because of Leadership Circle and previous support. For this research this year, I received the inaugural Rosalind Franklin Award from the National Neurotrauma Society in July. It's an award sponsored by our premier internationally available Journal of Neurotrauma, and it's in recognition of the impactful scientific contribution of this work to the neurotrauma field. So, thank you. So this included, So over the past 9 years, Leadership Circle has provided equipment that has helped our program receive over $4 million in extramural federal support for preclinical research. This includes a 5-year NIH grant I was awarded in 2017 for $1.65 million. Next year, this grant comes up for competitive renewal for an additional 5 years and an additional $1.65 million. These 5-year grants are essential for my research to continue at Phoenix Children's Hospital, where only 10% of the renewals are awarded. So I need your help to make this the strongest possible grant application. I want to be the first lab to report the impact of sex hormones on glutamate neurotransmission. We have exciting preclinical data that indicate that drug therapy right after traumatic brain injury improves outcome by 30%, but we only have this data in males, and we need to add females in and check for drug availability before and after TBI in males and females. So including the females as an independent group doubles the size of our experiments, along with associated costs and labor. So my request from Leadership Circle is the equipment, supplies, and short-term technical support to expedite these exciting experiments in a time for us to submit the strongest possible grant in 2022. So our clinicians cannot begin to change the standard of care between boys and girls until we have preclinical data that justifies these newer clinical trials. And so now it's time that we learn about Venus. Thank you. Okay, yeah.
It's always awkward when I have to come up on stage, like, time's up. Okay, we're going to do a 3-minute Q&A, and we have the microphones out in the audience. Great, and over here. So if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand, and the microphones will come over to you. Since we are live streaming, we want to make sure that the audience at home can clearly hear what's being asked as well. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Right here in front. They're going to bring the mic. Okay. They'll bring the microphone, and then we'll take the question.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm wondering what equipment you use to measure, and do you use SPEC scans at all?
So the question is, what equipment do we use, and do we use SPEC scans? The answer first is no, we don't use SPEC scans. What we have is it's electrochemical equipment where we use microelectrodes, where we can measure how the brain communicates in real time. And so it's the only technology available, and it's where my expertise lies. There's only about 20 to 30 labs in the world that can do this. George?
Thank you, Teresa. I think it's important. You kind of glossed over something for this audience to understand that these grants that we give to the doctors for research and medical equipment and so forth sometimes grow into much larger amounts. And if you could just give them a couple of examples, because in the years, very recent past, you've been very successful in getting additional funds from the start of this process, okay?
Oh, sorry, there it is. I've received $250,000 in support over 4 different grants for equipment. It's the electrochemical equipment, and it's a specialized microscope. And data taken from these approaches has brought in over $4 million for preclinical data. And not only that, it's just been, had I not had this, I couldn't have gotten my lab started and gained independence as a scientist. So it was really important for my professional development. And so it's why I have Leadership Circle, and every paper that I publish, Leadership Circle is there in the acknowledgments, because I wouldn't be here without that kind of support. So it's very important, and I thank you very much.
We have 30 seconds left. Any other questions? All right, doctor, thank you so much. Well done. And now we will hear from Dr. A.J. Perumbeti from Pathology, Transfusion Medicine, and Lab Informatics. And his project is called Female Low Iron Prevalence and Prediction Study. Doctor, take it away.
Good evening. I'm going to keep the focus on young women following an amazing talk. So, let me tell you a story about our teenagers and how we depend on them. This same TikTok text generation that we can't get out of bed donates 18% of our blood supply. But there's a safety issue with this. Blood is where they store their iron. They need iron to make blood, and iron is critical for the brain and the body. So when I was at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, we started looking at iron levels in teenagers prior to their blood donation and first-time blood donors. My jaw dropped. 1 in 4 teenage girls were iron deficient. I thought, wow, this is a huge problem for our young women that are growing up in this competitive society. There began a journey to better understand iron deficiency. And From that arose FLIP AI, the Female Low Iron Prevalence and Prediction Study. So let's define the problem. There are over 1 billion people in the world with iron deficiency, making it the biggest public health problem that we face. In the United States, 10 to 25% of young women have iron deficiency. This is due to heredity, menses, diet, and growth. The NHANES US Health Study has shown that in the last 3 decades, we haven't made a dent in this problem. So despite all the new medical technologies, we're still where we were at 30 years ago. Iron deficiency can be pretty dramatic symptomatically, but it can also be very subtle, and this leads to delayed diagnosis and misdiagnosis. Anemia is a late finding of iron deficiency after iron stores have been depleted. This can lead to children that are much sicker. And herein lies the critical problem. We screen for iron deficiency by checking for anemia, but anemia only occurs after all your iron stores have been depleted. So we're finding this way too late. So currently, we screen for iron deficiency with blood tests, like a complete blood count. And the problem with this strategy is that it misses greater than 50% of patients with iron deficiency. If there's no anemia, often we stop testing. The next test would be a ferritin test. But the problem with the ferritin test is that, number one, the recommendations don't say to get a ferritin test if you don't have anemia. Number two, it takes more blood, it's a different tube, it costs more, and it takes more time. So how would this look from a patient's perspective? Your daughter, sister, niece, or friend goes to the doctor and says they're tired. They check a complete blood count. They don't have anemia, so they're reassured and sent home for maybe months or years before they're diagnosed. If they have anemia, they come back for follow-up tests, and it takes several weeks before they get started on iron treatment. So what this does is it leaves many patients and many young women who have an iron deficiency handicap. So this is where FLIP AI comes in. FLIP AI will apply artificial intelligence software to the CBC test that we already do to predict iron deficiency in our PCH hospital clinics. And why would AI help? A CBC contains a lot of information on blood quality and characteristics. AI algorithms can pick up patterns of iron deficiency that human brains just can't. These patterns will be used to detect iron deficiency early before you get to anemia. In a proof of concept study, we looked at CBCs with simple calculations. And with these simple calculations, we could pick up about half of the young women with iron deficiency, which we thought was great. We were surprised and excited that CBC plus AI, we can detect 98% of the young women with iron deficiency, making it an almost perfect test. In the future, with artificial intelligence and iron detector tools, we will catch iron deficiency early and treat it quickly. We have planned a multi-pronged approach to test our iron deficiency detector tools with 8 studies over 5 years. 1 study was completed and was proof of concept. 2 studies have been submitted, and the FLIP AI study is being submitted for the Leadership Circle funding proposal. We're planning for additional funding through grants and partnerships, and this work will be accelerated through collaboration. We have an ironclad team working on this project to support and advise. So, to summarize, FLIP AI is a prospective trial powered to verify that iron deficiency detector tools in adolescent females will predict iron deficiency accurately. We'll recruit 2,000 patients. 85% of the funding is going to go to testing or donor recruitment. We'll facilitate the treatment of study patients that we identify as iron deficient. And with your support, we will work on developing a tool that will lead to early diagnosis and fast treatment for iron deficiency at Phoenix Children's Hospital and throughout the world. This project will be readily scalable for clinical, commercial, and consumer application to an over 1 billion person iron deficiency market. Most importantly, we hope to remove the iron deficiency handicap from young women. This can be illustrated in this case for a patient. She was going to school, working, exercising, and maintaining a social life. She felt something was off, but couldn't pinpoint it. After several years, she was diagnosed with iron deficiency. Her thoughts were, I actually had better concentration, energy, sleep, less lightheadedness, tingling, and fewer mood swings after I was started on iron therapy. I just wish it was started earlier. So let's flip iron deficiency on its head. Thank you for considering our proposal.
Thank you, Doctor. And now we'll go to the Q&A. 3 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. I can see you're going to jump in here on everyone. Go for it.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. I was wondering if this might, I was wondering if this might eventually be used for adults as well, or if it's obviously primarily gauged towards adolescents. What patterns do you see that would be an indicator that a CBC test isn't showing?
So the way artificial intelligence work, and this would be considered something called narrow artificial intelligence, meaning very task specific, is it looks at a bunch of data that comes from the complete blood count. Things like the size of the red cell, the number of red cells that are there, the number of platelets, the number of white cells. And it looks for subtle patterns and variation because the blood comes from the bone marrow and it reacts to different stresses like iron deficiency. These stresses just aren't, these stresses and the impact of these stresses on these complete blood counts aren't really super apparent when you look at them, even from an expert like a hematologist. But by doing a lot of testing and verification, the algorithms can pick them up. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
How will PCORNet be involved in your study?
So PCORNet is a national database for, and it sounds like you already know about it, for pediatric, and also it's kind of attached to another organization which has adult databases. And it's the effort for all the hospitals in the country to collect data on their patients and then have this big data population to analyze and improve medical care. So we submitted a proposal to PCORNet to get data for CBCs and ferritin tests to run our algorithms on for multiple hospitals throughout the country. And it'll be a nice retrospective data to kind of confirm that the algorithms work. One of the challenges with artificial intelligence in general is the generalizability. So we showed proof of concept that it worked super in the case-specific situation that we tested already. So now we need to test it on a whole bunch of different situations. And from each of these different scenarios, we're going to learn something and eventually, hopefully, perfect it so that we can apply this generally.
Right here in the back.
Hi.
Oh, excuse me. What happens to these young women and adolescents that have low iron if it's not treated?
So symptoms of iron deficiency can be dramatic, but they can also be very subtle. It can be things like low energy, low concentration. What I worry about with a young daughter is, if their ability to concentrate is a little bit less, how are they going to compete academically? Or if they're athletes, they may have a little bit less energy. Since we're all individuals, it's hard really to gauge us against anyone else. We just want to be kind of the best we can be. And to me, this kind of goes against that. And you're not able to operate at optimal performance from your brain to your body with iron deficiency.
Doctor, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much.
Our next presenters are Dr. Rajiv Bhatia from Pulmonology and Dr. Araj Sabati from Cardiology. And their project is called Home Clinical Exercise Monitoring, Unraveling the Exercise Potential.
So Dr. Sabati could not be here. Instacart, Peloton, Carvana. What is shared among all these companies? No one ever thought that these companies would be successful. But you know what? People like convenience. Everyone wants everything at their doorsteps. And this pandemic has clearly accelerated that idea. Grocery home delivery boomed. Peloton, the group exercise machine, their sales jumped more than 4 times. So convenience matters. Good afternoon. We are here asking Leadership Circle $150,000 to bring this critical cardiopulmonary exercise testing to the patient's doorsteps. It will not only be convenient, but would be life-changing. We as physicians see a lot of kids with asthma, cystic fibrosis, obesity, heart disease. CF alone has more than 30,000 patients in US. PCH itself has more than 500 patients. 1 in 13 Americans has asthma. 1 in 100 live births have heart disease. And obesity, well, we have an epidemic of obesity. Unfortunately, 1 in 5 children in US struggle with obesity. We spend whopping $150 billion on healthcare associated with obesity. Unfortunately, still, 3 out of 4 kids do not get enough physical activity. And you know why that is important? Because activity is therapeutic for all kids, even more for patients with chronic conditions. This was a study done in cystic fibrosis patients where they followed these patients for 8 years. On the x-axis is years, on the y-axis is survival. After 8 years, the kids who were fit were more likely to be alive. This reminds me a story about my former patients, sibling with cystic fibrosis. Let's call them John and Susie. John was very athletic, a baseball player, exercised a few times a week. On the other hand, Susie was not active at all. Both lived in the same house, had same mutations. However, John did really well. He was even healthier than many of the other kids. On the other hand, Susie gradually worsened and eventually was listed for lung transplant. So we know that exercise is critical for these patients, but still, many of them do not end up doing the activity. The reason for that is because their parents, patients are worried about their safety. We as physicians need to give them their fitness goals, tell them how much exercise is safe for them. And then there comes the role for exercise testing. We bring them in, we make them run on a treadmill or make them exercise on a bike and give them the safe prescription. These are 3 interlocking gears of heart, muscle, and lungs. So when we exercise, these rotate faster and faster to uncover problems not only sooner, but in some cases, these would not be uncovered at all, like happened in our patient Susie. We get a detailed multiple-page report, and this is critical to give them a safe prescription. So this is all good. So then where is the problem? The problem is this equipment is large, it's clunky, and cumbersome. And this appointment takes more than 2 hours. And that limits our ability to do this study frequently and to keep these kids healthy. We have a solution. We want to do a portable cardiopulmonary exercise testing. It can be done where the patient is, their home, training facilities, schools. This would not only bring convenience, but also bring this critical cardiopulmonary exercise testing at their doorsteps. It can have huge impact. With your funding, we would like to buy this portable exercise equipment, which can give us a hospital-grade testing where the patient is. With your funding, we want to jumpstart a business model which will be self-sustainable. Think of it as a convenience of Amazon and Peloton together. So imagine our patient Susie, had we gone to her house and done this test a few times at her convenience and her parents' convenience, remember those parents were dealing with 2 kids with CF, the outcome could have been different. We have a dedicated team which we want to bring together with this funding. Between me and Dr. Sabati, we have more than 20 years experience of exercise testing and interpretation. I know here many of you are Simon Sinek fans, so we know that the most important thing why we want to do a project is why. And here is our why. We can have huge impact. We can diagnose disease sooner, we can provide more accurate prognosis and safe exercise prescription. Think about Susie. She was diagnosed with lung transplant. Think about the economic, physical, mental impact on that family. With this test, the outcome could have been different. We can improve the outcome by promoting healthy lifestyle. We can give them safe goals. And all of this invariably will have a huge economic impact. Remember, I said that we spend $150 billion on obesity-related health diseases. In step-down analysis, that comes out to be $140 million for Maricopa County alone. Even if we are able to affect 10% of that, that's a huge market share. Also, at this time, we are doing close to 700 to 800 studies in our lab. We can easily quadruple that by taking this where the patient is, in remote locations, schools, training facilities, et cetera. With this investing, we can bring this innovative idea to reality and make PCH a pioneer in this field. So please invest to make this project a reality and help us help Johns and Susies of the world who come into PCH every day. PCH with a mission statement to provide hope, healing, and a best child care, best health care to children. Your investment can make that possible. Thank you.
Questions from the audience? We'll start the 3-minute period right now. Go ahead. I see you want to put that hand up. Right here in the front, the beautiful lady has a question.
Hi.
Hi. Hello.
Is it diagnostic and therapeutic? Are you testing and treating? Or what would happen in a typical session?
Sure, that's a great question. So what we do is it's mainly diagnostic, but that is critical to give them a safe exercise prescription. So when we test them, we have, as we were showing, that there's a detailed report. And based on what numbers we get, we can tell them that they can exercise in this range to this range safely. And also we can give them certain exercises which fall into that range. So there's a huge list. We usually ask them what they like to do. Some kids like to bike, some like to play. So we can give them that this is your safety range. And not only safety range, but also to kind of push them to be a little more fit for like obese patients. So it is really critical for them to be exercising kind of their edge, what they can do, and keep pushing. So we can specifically give them that window.
Any other questions? Doctor, thank you very much.
Sure,
Well
thank
done. Tell you what, with 2 little kids, that Peloton and Amazon are my 2 best friends. Never have to leave my house. And next, on behalf of Dr. Goldman, we will hear from Dr. Carla Allen from the Barrow Neurological Institute at Phoenix Children's. And her project is called Dyslexia Screening Questionnaire. Doctor?
Wow. Wow, well, what a great opportunity. I've enjoyed speaking with some of you today. Thank you so much. All right, so my first training job as a psychologist was at a juvenile prison. And in that role, my job was to complete psychoeducational testing on young boys to figure out if they had learning disabilities that needed to be addressed during their sentence. And many of these boys could not read or were functionally illiterate in spite of the fact that they had normal intelligence. They'd simply been promoted from one grade to the next year after year without any specialized instruction. By the time I saw them, many of these boys had already lost their love of learning and felt as though they were a failure in life. It became clear one of the most modifiable risk factors for juvenile delinquency is school failure due to reading problems. And that's something we can do something about. Sometimes disabilities are invisible, but with your investment, we can do what's right. We can make the invisible visible. Dyslexia impacts children of all socioeconomic backgrounds and intelligence levels. And in fact, some of the people who have changed the world, like Richard Branson, Henry Ford, and Steve Jobs, have learned how to manage their dyslexia. But they were identified. How many Steve Jobs might exist in our backyard? And if they're there, are we going to miss them? Now that I'm an Arizonan like you, one of the things I have learned is that we are leaders in innovation. And with your investment, you can help us innovate and drive the early detection and intervention for children with autism. For children with dyslexia. So, and this was the entry gate to the juvenile prison that I worked at, so you can see that there. Okay, so you might imagine that a project of this scale would cost $500,000 or more, and you would be right were it not for the dream team of partnership that you see here on this slide, which allows us to partner with ASU and their graduate students to do some of this testing that's required to make this work. I want to be clear that I'm so delighted to be speaking to all of you who are difference makers here at PCH within our community and beyond. And that's exactly what this proposal is poised to do, be a difference maker. So one of the people that's at the heart of this proposal is Dr. Khurana, and I want to tell you a little story about her. So she's a pediatrician, and she had a daughter who's incredibly bright but was struggling in school. And she was initially misdiagnosed with ADHD and started on medication that caused some side effects and wasn't really giving her the benefit that she needed. It turns out she had dyslexia, but she didn't get diagnosed properly until she was 10. And intervention for dyslexia works best when it happens earlier. And so thankfully, she still responded to the intervention, but not all kids might. And if it can happen under the noses of one of our pediatricians, it can happen to many other children. And in speaking to you, I've learned that many of you had concerns for your daughters, your sons, or your grandchildren. So you know this problem pretty well too. All right. So can you read this sentence? Chances are good that if you're the 85% of the population without dyslexia, you can read the sentence easily without a problem. However, if you are the 15% of children in particular who struggle with dyslexia, that sentence may be very difficult for you. And on a grand scale here in Arizona, that corresponds to roughly 50,000 children in grades K through 3 who are at risk for dyslexia. And those children, unfortunately, are going to have a higher risk of depression and anxiety, in part because dyslexia impacts every aspect of learning. It's difficult to write when you can't detect the sounds that make up words. It's difficult to do math when you can't read the word problems that go along with that. So these carry long-lasting impacts, and these children are less likely to graduate from high school. They're also much more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system, like I presented kind of earlier on. And so, if you're 6 years old and you can't read, who knows this? Well, you all know the problem now that many people don't, but we know the solution. The solution involves giving pediatricians the tools that they need to better identify this problem, because we cannot rely on schools alone to do it. So the solution here that we're presenting to you today is the refinement of a tool called the Dyslexia Screening Questionnaire. It's a 10-minute questionnaire. It can be completed during 6-year-old well child visits with their pediatrician by parents. And right away, it will tell us whether children exhibit the early warning signs for dyslexia. Because as I said earlier, every minute counts for these kids. Early intervention makes all the difference in the world. So I bet you're thinking to yourself, why can't schools do this? The answer is they ought to be, and there's even a mandate that says that they should, but the mandate is unfunded, and there's no best practice procedures laid out for how to do this effectively. We need to create a Swiss cheese model where there's more than one professional with the tools at their belt to figure out how to do this, and that's why we think pediatricians are the right place to start, because they already do all kinds of other developmental and behavioral screening for kids earlier in life, right? We depend on them for that. It's the right place. So our project request is right under $150,000, and with your investment, we'll be able to take this tool that's already been developed and test it against the gold standard, which is that one-on-one psychoeducational testing I talked about earlier. And with that, we'll be able to make this measure lean and clean. We'll be able to find the items that work best at identifying risk and trim those ones that aren't as effective. We'll essentially be able to confirm that this screen works. And so that's what your investment will do for us. The impact on this would be immediate. So we'd be able to better streamline wait lists for the psychoeducational testing. We'll be able to start asking schools to go ahead and do that intervention once they have a validated tool that shows them that these kids are at risk. It will be sustainable. So once this tool is developed, we can utilize it over and over again, and we can take it national. And so that's the big thing. It's scalable. So I worked on the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines for ADHD. Dyslexia is just like that, except for we don't have a great tool yet to identify it. Once we have that, we already have the interventions. There's no reason this can't become the standard of care in every pediatric practice across the country. And with that, I will just end by saying this team is amazing, right? All the people that are a part of this, we've got forward momentum, and with your investment, I know that we can carry this across the finish line and make us a national leader in care for kids with dyslexia. Thank you.
All right, let's begin the 3 minutes. Anyone have a question? Right there in the back of the room.
Yes, I was curious. It mentioned that the parent would do the testing. Is the parent always capable of doing that testing?
Thank you. So that's a great question. So the question is, are parents really always capable of doing the testing? The measure is a screening questionnaire that will ask very simple questions like, does your child have a hard time understanding sounds? Do strangers have a hard time understanding them? Some of those very basic building blocks that help us better identify dyslexia, parents should be able to do it. And right now we are finished with the first phase of this project, which is refining those questions to make sure they're understandable to everybody. That's all done for those English speakers. We're on second stage now for Spanish speakers. So I think the answer is yes to your question. They'll be able to.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And next we will hear from Dr. Katie Burkill from Palliative Care Bone Marrow Transplant, and her project is called Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder in Bone Marrow Transplant Patients and Their Families. Doctor?
Hi, everyone. Thank you. So my little girl spent 4 days in the hospital 2 years ago. And when I look at this picture of her, it still just breaks my heart. And I know that this is just a drop in the bucket compared to what a lot of our families go through at PCH every day. This is Jackie at 10 years old, 1 week before she was diagnosed with leukemia. And then this is Jackie 6 months after that on life support, with her mom not knowing if this is the last picture she'll ever get to take of her little girl. The families of our bone marrow transplant program at PCH came to us and said, you need to help us deal with the mental health consequences of these experiences. So we're here to ask you for a modest investment to help mitigate the trauma that these families go through. Now, our bone marrow transplant program just celebrated its 500th transplant. This is a really big milestone, and we are so proud. I want to tell you a little bit about what that is. You may have heard of it, but not know what it means. Patients going through BMT will get treated first with either chemotherapy or radiation to get rid of those unhealthy cells. And then we harvest healthy cells from a donor and then implant them into a patient. So with Jackie's journey, it started out with chemotherapy. Here she is getting her hair cut, her beautiful hair. You know, if you know any 10-year-old little girls, this is like a huge disappointment. But here she is when she's going through chemotherapy. These are all pictures her mom took. And then, unfortunately, she ended up having to go through radiation as well. The treatment was too much for her kidneys, so she ended up having hemodialysis for end-stage kidney failure. And then when her heart and lungs gave out, she had to go on ECMO for life support. So these side effects of BMT are exceedingly common, as are the mental health consequences. So PTSD symptoms can last for years after transplant, and actually, if there's no intervention, there's no evidence that it ever goes away. Family members are also at high risk for PTSD, particularly moms. And those symptoms can create conflict in the family. Lots of times, divorce happens. The symptoms spread into, the child's classrooms. Entire communities can be affected. The case can be worse when there are multiple kiddos involved. So often siblings serve as the donors because they're the closest genetic match. So in this case, oops, sorry about that. The child in the middle donated his bone marrow 2 times to save his twin brothers. And so this was an amazing medical victory, of course. But the stress did take its toll, and the mom and dad did get divorced. The kids just really missed out on a lot of the normal developmental experiences that most of us take for granted. Jackie's mom reported a lot of symptoms that we find commonly among BMT families. So she'd talk about getting triggered by things, feeling a sense of panic, feeling like she couldn't breathe. And these are experiences, not only specific to our 500 plus BMT patients, but hundreds of children who are getting treated at PCH every year for life-threatening conditions. So Phoenix Children's has really been on the forefront in thinking about how adverse childhood experiences link up with long-term health outcomes. And yet, we're not, and actually no pediatric hospitals are systematically screening for PTSD among patients or families. So our solution is to develop a system where an automated screener would go out to families before their regular visits. So then we know when our families are suffering, and then we can connect with them with the support that will help. We'll also do research on the information we get so that we can be more proactive with intervening with families at the right time. Our interdisciplinary team represents cancer, palliative care, psychology, and child and family development. And we have high expectations for impact and sustainability, primarily because this project was driven by the families. They said, we need this. The system we develop with the funding can be used ongoing. It can be a test case for other programs at PCH, and will be a model because no other children's hospitals are doing this. And we'll also be able to apply for NIH funding to develop and test an evidence-based preventive intervention for families. I want to share that when I was 5 years old, my friend Adam, who was 4, also was diagnosed with leukemia, just like Jackie. And I remember him not being able to come out and play anymore. They had to set up cameras in his bedroom because, so that he could attend school virtually, which was a big thing. This was in 1986. But he died when he was 8 years old. And his mom held on to that grief for 31 years and just recently published this book about Adam. Luckily, Jackie has a happier ending. After 169 days, she was able to leave the hospital. But her mom really wants you to know that, we can't just treat the physical conditions and ignore the mental health consequences. Our families are counting on us to help them live, but also to live well. So we thank you for your consideration.
Okay, we'll open up the 3-minute Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? No questions? Not even from the front row? Come on, I know it's in there. We can bring a microphone up here, and we'll do one question here from the front.
Doctor, just making sure you said that. Thank you, yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I know you said there have been 500 transplants. How many does that estimate about per month or per year?
Oh, yeah. So we expect in the next year that the numbers, keep getting bigger, but we expect in the next year that this would provide support for 550 families going through. So we would send out the screeners to the whole family. So it would be the primary caregiver responding about the symptoms for the patient, and then the siblings, and then the the caregivers would also respond about their own symptoms as well.
We have one right here from the gentleman at that. Thank you.
Hi there.
Hi.
Have there been programs such as the one you're suggesting with PTSD support for other patients and their families? So not bone marrow therapy, but perhaps something other than that?
Yeah, no, this is something that really has not been addressed fully, and even the literature that's out there is really limited. So we're going to definitely take advantage of this opportunity to both serve our families, but also learn about PTSD symptoms in BMT patients, and then we're hoping to expand it out to learn about other conditions as well. I'm thinking, patients in the cardiovascular ICU would be a really good fit. Definitely broad impact.
So are there best practices in place in terms of therapy that would be for young adults where we'd really be able to match the appropriate therapy for those needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the kind of evidence-based approaches. Also, family systems approaches where you have the child and the parents together. Even just some, preventive work I do a lot of work in prevention and teaching parents how to answer difficult questions to children about what's going to happen to me, when I go through this would be so beneficial.
How do you see this system being sustainable over the long haul and transferable to other needy programs at Phoenix Children's Hospital?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, the system, it's upfront costs, but it's something that can be used ongoing. So we actually have a couple of options for like how we might implement it. And our initial thought was to build something in without getting too technical, in REDCap, which is a system where you can send out, you can have it set up with patients and implementation schedules, and it'll automatically send out the surveys that you program, and it makes it really easy to track like when families have responded and when they haven't, and you might need to follow up. So basically that's something that could be applied, broadly to all families. So part of, our prioritizing BMT is just thinking about like, there's a little bit of reluctance to say like, to open up this can of worms, maybe, to say like, how overwhelmed will our system become? So we're starting small, and the reason for that is just to get a sense of like what the need is, and then we can kind of work from there. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And our next presenter is Dr. Luis Gonsalves from Radiology, and his project is called Fetal Cardiac Imaging, a 21st Century Solution.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for the opportunity for all of us to present here. I mean, we really appreciate the opportunity. So I would like you to meet my friend Mark Skilansky. He's a pediatric cardiologist at UCLA, and he scans fetuses, for a living. But he does something really cool on the weekends. He goes to the aquarium and scans fetal dolphins, the hearts of fetal dolphins. So this is Mark with his scanner, scanning the heart of a dolphin. And as you know, dolphins are always on the move, just like babies. They're very hard to scan. And they are mammals, right? So they have rib cages that protect the heart. So that's a barrier for ultrasound. So if we were to scan a dolphin using a body scanner, such as an MRI for a pregnant dolphin, this is what you have to do. Hopefully we'll play. Yep. So this is our dolphin moving there. And then you're going to see that there are 14 people, grabbing the dolphin, put it on a stretcher, and then you're going to see the dolphin being tied up to a table before being placed on the scanner. And that's to counteract the movement, right? And that's the same problem we have with fetuses. So what I would like to propose is a solution to scan fetal hearts using MRI, not to substitute ultrasound, but to work on those cases where those ribs are preventing us from seeing the heart properly. This is actually the solution right there. Next, please. My clicker is not. Okay. So there are about 8,000 babies with a congenital heart defect each year in Arizona. About 2,000 of them will need the surgery in the first year of life. And the sickest of these babies are the ones that come to Phoenix Children's. They come to us either, for intensive care or surgery right after birth. And we need to identify them correctly so we can have our teams prepared to receive these babies. And also, in the case of ultrasounds in the late pregnancy, when you cannot see the heart very well, sometimes you need to, you're actually able to change a diagnosis of a difficult or dire condition into something more benign, and that reduces the anxiety of the parents, as you can imagine. So just to recap, ultrasound is a great tool to examine the heart, but the problem with ultrasound is that you have these shadows that don't allow you to see the heart all the time the way you want to see it. MRI is great because the shadows are not a problem anymore. The problem with MR, to get this big, beautiful picture that you have there, you have to sedate the child. So how do we do this with fetuses? I mean, we cannot possibly have 15 people grabbing the fetus or put the mother and the baby under anesthesia so they are quiet for like 1 hour for us to get the pictures. So the solution for this, and this is just to illustrate that, they're always doing this, And there you go. So this is our baby in one of our actual scans. And we actually nicknamed this baby Baby Flipper. And they're the dolphins again. That's how it came about. So how do you scan Baby Flipper? How do you get the images of the heart with all this motion? The solution for this is to really post-process everything. So instead of immobilizing the baby, you actually get the images and put it to a computer pipeline to post-process everything, okay? So the first step is to have something that acquires the images very fast. And this is done with a sequence in our scanner called KT Sense. And we need to purchase 1 or 2 licenses of these sequence to be able to do that. This is just like a demo that we had. So this is an actual heart being scanned. You notice that these images have artifacts. You notice that the mother is moving. So all of this is eliminated with this second step. So the second step is the imaging post-processing. So what we do in this step, we correct the motion, we get rid of the artifacts, and then we assemble the images on 3D and 4D images that allow us to see, the structures in much better enhancement. The problem is that this process is lengthy right now. It's about 24 to 36 hours of post-processing. It's all done with this lovely thing here, coding. I'm sure that everyone here is an expert in coding. When we text messages, we're always coding, right? But I'm not an expert in coding. I like to see babies' hearts. So we really need a genius to do that, right? To be writing these codes. We have one genius that does that, and this is my friend, Dr. Nick Rupert, who is part of this grant. So Nick took upon himself actually to get this published platform, implement. But what we need now is this. We need an app. We all love to click. I want a program that I can click and get these images, hopefully in less than 24 to 36 hours. So this is our solution in already working. I mean, what we need is to develop the software to make it better and faster. So here you see three-dimensional images of the heart with motion. You see the chambers, the septum, and the connections of the vessels to the chambers very well in this case. And we're requesting an investment of about $130,000 to buy the licenses to allow us to acquire the images, and mostly to really develop the software and implement it. So this technology is already helping patients at PCH. I would just like to take a little bit of your time to show this case that we had recently. So this is a baby that came to us at 28 weeks. The baby had a preliminary diagnosis of double outlet biventricle. This means that the aorta and the pulmonary artery were both connected to the right ventricle instead of one to the left and one to the right. So if this was true, this baby would need about 3 surgeries after birth to survive with a single ventricle. Because the images were not optimal, we were asked by the cardiologist to perform an MRI just like I showed you. So these are the images of this MRI. It does show that the left ventricle is smaller than the right. Then we do 3D reconstructions with color-coded models, pretty much like a project that this grant, the foundation funded in the past, to do 3D reconstructions and print hearts so that the surgeons can see better. So here you see the chambers and the venous and the arterial connections. And the main point of this image is actually illustrated in this area here. The left ventricle is in orange, and the aorta is in red. So the aorta actually connects the left ventricle and not to the right. So we were able to correct the diagnosis with that. This baby had a small arch, so you would need some help after birth. And this is not the baby, okay? It's just to illustrate the happy ending for the story. I had to come up with a picture. But basically, this baby was born a term. It did have a small arch after birth by echo. 4 days after, it self-corrected after something called the PDA closed. So this baby was discharged home at 4 days of life with no need for surgical intervention. And these parents were not like waiting, for 3 surgeries and all that other good stuff to happen. So your impact will help us diagnose, consolidate our program as a leader in fetal cardiac MR. There are not many programs in the world doing this kind of stuff. Will help us probably generate some downstream revenue from grants or commercialization. And for me, the most important thing, really, I need to continue with the program. So as you see, I have only one genius working. Fortunately, I hope he likes to work with us and stays, but we need to convert his knowledge into something that I can click and that other people in the world can click, and then, get this on the go and working. Thank you so much.
Really smart to use dolphins and cute babies in your presentation.
Can I say something?
Just saying from a media perspective.
It's just because that baby that I showed you, the physicist nicknamed the baby Flipper. So that made it easy.
Does anyone have any questions? All right up front here.
Hi. Is there similar technology in any other industry that you may be able to look toward as some sort of a guide? And your genius, how far has he delved into this? Is he onto any leads?
Well, everything that you saw here was, this pipeline was first published in 2020, okay? So when we were asking for the grant for the first time, and we got delayed with the pandemic, the grant was actually to develop the imaging to the point that you saw here, and then the software. So over this year, we really delved really deep into this, to the point that we have now 11 babies scanned with this technology now at PCH. We have prior experience with 3D ultrasound of the heart, since 2003. But the same problem that you have with 2D ultrasound is the same thing as 3D. You have the shadows that don't allow you to see the heart in about 30% of the cases. So this is a solution for the sickest babies, the ones that the cardiologists really have a difficult question to answer, and that's where we are right now.
And so your genius has been with you since day one?
Yes. Yeah. Partner in crime from day one. Okay. And I really hope it continues.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Okay,
appreciate it. Yeah, you're doing something right when you're being referred to as the genius. You don't even need a name. That's going to conclude our presentations. Please help me in giving a big round of applause to all of these brilliant doctors and researchers. And now it is time to vote. Please rank the proposals from 1 to 6, with 1 being the most deserving of your investment. And for those of you here in person, please cast your vote using the ballot in your program. You can write your rankings on the ballot, or you can scan the QR code in the ballot with your smartphone to vote online. If you are using a paper ballot, please drop it in the basket on your way out. And if you are joining us on the live stream, please use the link you received by email to vote online. I am told that the results of the voting will be shared with all of you at the end of October. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings to a close our program. Thank you for indulging me. And it was great to be back with you again. This is the first time I've worn these glasses on stage. Oprah was wearing them, so I'm like, I need to have those. They'll come in handy at some point. So thank you all so very much. And again, big round of applause to all the presenters today. Wonderful work to all of you. Thank you.